What's up, everyone? This is Rayuka, and this is the return of the podcast. Yes, the podcast is back. It's alive. It's been a long time, but yeah, I'm back. I'm back at doing this. So, just be aware the podcast is for mature audiences. And if you're new to this podcast, feel free to subscribe and follow depending on where you listen to this podcast. Of course, it is always appreciated. Now that I got that out of the way, I am going to get into the topics of discussion that I'm going to talk about today. And that is the first thing is Tekken. Wow, Tekken. So, Tekken 7. Tekken 7's came a long way. It sold millions of copies. Fairly successful, but it has issues, in my opinion. I mean, I notice a lot of content creators in the FGC usually ignore this or just don't want to talk about it or don't care. But I care enough to talk about it. So I'm going to give my 2 cents. Now, as someone that has played all the Tekkens since I can't count how far back, but for a very long time, Tekken 7 is a fairly good game. Not my favorite in the series, but fairly good. The story obviously concludes the Mishima story that's between Kazuya and Hahachi Mishima, but his dad. But at the same time, there's still where it concluded. There's also things that aren't answered all the way through. My opinion, like why Akuma owed Kazuya's mom the favor per se, like what 100%. Like, there's just things there that I just didn't get. Like, it was cool to see Akuma in there, but yet again, guest characters to me, when it comes to fighting games especially, can become an issue later on because, well, licensing. And if these games get re-released, there's a good chance these characters won't come back. And this goes right into what I'm going to talk about, and that is the Tekken 7 Legendary Edition that's releasing only in Europe. Now, what's interesting about this re-release is that it includes the base roster and is missing a few DLC characters. I believe there's going to be 8 of 15 DLC characters, and it's missing quite a few. Now, it seems like the people at Europe that enjoy the Tekken series, at least from what I've been reading up on, seem to be not too happy about this. Seems to be a bit of an uproar because it's not only missing that, apparently it's missing a few modes like Tekken, Ultimate Tekken Bow mode and whatnot. So, guest characters in fighting games. Guest characters are a gimmick. Right, they're meant to sell fast. Right, you put in a really cool character that's popular at the time, you throw them in the game, and it'll sell. Or you put in a character that people have been requesting, or you put in a character that, well, looks cool enough to be in the game that makes sense. Well, I mean, there could be all kinds of reasons for there to be a guest character. That's what I'm trying to get at. But when it comes to Tekken and the DLC practices, this is a case of too little, too late. I'm not surprised that some DLC characters ain't showing up, especially guest characters for the re-release of Tekken 7 Legendary Edition. And the reason for this is because most likely licensing issues. For those who don't know, Dead or Alive 5 Last Round had a guest character, Mai, from Fatal Fury - King of Fighters appear. And she was removed from being downloaded. And there was never explanation given, at least to this day, since I looked into it, from Chloe Tecmo to why this character was removed. But she is in Dead or Alive 6. She's just not available to download for Dead or Alive 5 Last Round. And there's a lot of speculation and theory to this. Some of it has to do with, well, she's in DOA 6, so they removed her out of Dead or Alive Last Round, so they could potentially increase the sales for her in DOA 6. Look, to me, what happened with Dead or Alive 5 Last Round, there's just so many red flags, but it's scummy that she was removed from Dead or Alive 5 last round with no explanation, but yet she appears in Dead or Alive 6 as a DLC with Kula Diamond from King of Fighters. So, I mean, hey, things happen, right? It just is what it is. Oh, man. But going back to Tekken. Tekken 7, you know, Kuma is a guest character that's also mixed into the story somehow, which I think is a mistake for Harada to do, because though Kuma is a cool character, him being mixed into the Tekken lore just was not a smart thing. It just wasn't. I mean, he's not a Bandai Namco character. It's not something they own. They don't own Street Fighter. And then there is, at least that I know of, they don't own Street Fighter. I mean, but then there is the other guest characters. I mean, you have Noctis, Geese Howard, Negan. It's I don't know. It's ridiculous. In the end of the day, to simplify it, if you don't like it, if you don't like what's going on with the Legendary Edition, don't buy it. There you go. Problem solved. With Ultimate Tekken Bowl Mode as well being removed from apparently this Legendary Edition, even to this day, I still feel that Tekken Bowl should not been in Tekken 7. It was out of place. It's a mode that to me makes sense for Tag Tournament and did not make sense for that mode to be in Tekken 7. And the only reason I see that mode was in there was because the Twitters and content creators / influencers were like, oh, we'll add Tekken Bowl. We need Tekken Bowl and Tekken 7 so we can create some content. I mean, look, not everything influencers say are always correct, and especially when they want certain things in games, I think sometimes developers should learn not to listen, because sometimes you can listen and it can turn into a bad thing. And when it comes to Tekken 7, the bowl mode anyways, it was out of place. It just didn't fit. It would have made more sense for them to add a mode that was in Tekken 3, which was the volleyball mode, into Tekken 7. That would have made sense, because that was a mode that was actually in a standalone Tekken game, not a tag tournament game. Or better yet, just make a whole new mode. I don't know. I mean, instead of giving people Tekken Bowl mode or volleyball mode, how about bring back Tekken Force? Oh wait, people wanted to throw a freaking ball when that could have been left for Tag Tournament. Which, by the way, there's been no Tag Tournament 3 so far. Because Namco Bandai, at least the Tekken team, seems to be too busy making DLC characters. Now, I hope that there's not another season of DLC for Tekken 7. I really do hope that this last season that passed, that's it. That's it. And I feel that the team, Harada, I think they should just focus on whatever they're doing next and make it official that, hey, we're not doing no more DLC for Tekken, that this is it, and call it a day. But then yet again, I wouldn't be surprised if they come out of nowhere and say, well, we have one more surprise, which I just don't want to see personally. So, Tekken 7. If you don't like what you see with DLC practices, just don't support it. That simple. I mean, there's so many problems when I could think of their season passes. Like, for instance, some of it was too overpriced for what you got in this season passes. And that's just my opinion. Like, most of this stuff is going to be my opinion. The fact that Harada released no story for these characters, you know, and you got people out there that they just want characters. They don't want story. But for me, I want substance, right? There was no character episodes to any of these DLC characters. And in Tekken 7, they had character episodes, and then they had the main arc, the Mishima Saga. And there was just no character episodes. It was just like, well, here's this new character, well, returning character, new character, whatever, even if it was a guest character, and we just don't want to take the time to give y'all like a character episode explaining, how they got here, whatever, or what happened. Instead, we just throw them in here and just play the character to your heart's content. Yeah. In the end of the day, when it comes to not just Tekken 7, but just fighting games, to me anyways, I feel there's a disconnect between the community and the developer. Because who is the developer listening to in the end of the day? Are they listening to just tournament players? Are they listening to the people that actually go out and buy these games? I mean, or is it a little bit of everything? I'm assuming it's a little bit of everything. At least that's what I want to believe. But then this kind of goes into the next topic. Marvel versus Capcom 2. Yes. They're still talking about these guest characters. And for those who don't know, Maximilian, dude, whatever, did a petition a while ago wanting to see the return of MVC2. Free Marvel vs. Capcom 2, right? Now, for me personally, I don't care if this game gets re-released or not. But I'm gonna say right now, I think it's going to. But the reason why I also say I don't care is because there's ways, for me anyways, to play Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I have a physical copy of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I don't have to worry about getting access to this game. At least right now anyways. And Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was released digitally at one point, and Marvel vs. Capcom Origins Collection, which was released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and it was removed. And it also had other games from Marvel vs. Capcom series as well in there. Now, when it comes to free Marvel vs. Capcom, I'm pretty sure, and I'm assuming the Marvel side of things is looking at how much money they can make off of this, right? If Marvel vs. Capcom 2 gets re-released, which I think is going to, and it releases for $60, it's not going to sell. I don't care what these content creators and influencers say, whatever. It's not going to sell like that. It's just not. Because what can justify $60? What can justify it? Are they going to redo all the sprites? I mean, if they redo all the sprites, I'll be like, something? That makes sense. Redo all the sprites. Make these characters look brand new in an old game. Obviously, they're going to throw in rollback. That's a guarantee. If the game gets re-released, it's going to have rollback netcode. It's going to happen. But is rollback enough to justify $60? Hell no. King of Fighters 98 has rollback. So no, rollback is not a good excuse. Oh, wait. They're going to add filters? I mean, not like there weren't filters in Marvel vs. Capcom Origins. Is that going to be justification? That, to me, is not good enough either. So, if they were to re-release Marvel vs. Capcom 2, which most likely will just have rollback and I don't know what else in between, unless they really put work in, which I just don't see, but if they do, that'll be surprising. For me, a price point for the game should be $25 max. I just don't see this game being worth 30, 40, 50, not even 60 by itself. It's just not worth it. It's just not. Yeah, given if you type in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 right now, you'll probably find physical copies that are extremely expensive, but digitally, a game that everyone could get access to at that point. And don't get me wrong, there's ways to get access to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but other ways that is. But it's not gonna re-release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 at a high price point is not gonna help it sell. So I mean, I think $25 or $20 at that is a good enough price point. Now, given if they decide to release a collection similar to Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, but they add X-Men Children of the Atom, they add Marvel Superheroes, and then X-Men vs. Street Fighter, then Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and then Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2. They pretty much give you like that whole library, that whole history there. And that all has rollback and who knows what in between, and they'll probably throw in some art or whatever, maybe a soundtrack even. I that probably justify maybe 50 bucks. If that, I say 40 is safe. But in the end of the day, these games they're old. I'm gonna keep it 100. They're old, and at this point, I just don't see it selling well. I don't see Marvel vs. Capcom 2 selling well for various reasons, not just because Marvel vs. Capcom, more so because Marvel has been not doing well itself in the sense of the way they've been handling these characters. That's another thing. So there's a lot of things that factor in. Marvel isn't the fire that it used to be. Back in my day, back in my time, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, when it came out, it was like the hottest game out there. Everybody was playing. It was crazy. Anyone that was playing fighting games was playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the longest of times after it released. But as with all things, eventually that hype, that fire fades away. And it's just not as hot as it used to be. It's just not. I'm sorry. I may like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The cat down the road may like Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But just as for the new generation, I mean, I can't speak for, but I can say, at least for what I can tell, they're not they're not too into this type of stuff. At least Marvel vs. Capcom does. And this is just me assuming. It's me assuming. I think if Marvel and Capcom wanted to capture a new audience, especially the generation that is now, it makes more sense to release a Marvel vs. Capcom 4. When it comes to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, another problem that's with it is that there's no character endings. There's no story. You're left with the credits rolling with some art that may change depending on what team you pick or whatever, but that's about it. You're left assuming things. And Marvel vs. Capcom 3, they tried. Marvel vs. Capcom 3, they tried to give these characters story and whatnot. Even though a lot of it was cheesy, didn't make sense. But hey, at least they had something. Then you have Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. They had that cinematic story that everybody trashed to oblivion. And the character models weren't so perfect or whatever. But hey, they tried with Infinite. But with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, it's big roster. A bunch of different colors for the characters. That's some art, I guess. Whatever. I mean, I don't know what they're gonna throw in there to pull people in, but the only thing I can think of is rollback. Everybody's gonna be talking about that rollback. Roll it on back. And then 3-4 months later, the game's gonna have Dead Online. Pretty much, there's gonna be barely people playing it. You'll probably see some of your favorite content creators out there playing it, but barely gonna be people playing it. You might even see the Justin Wong versus Maximilian doing collabs back and forth. I did an ultra combo and all this other bull crap. But in the end of the day, ultra combo in Marvel vs. Capcom. Yeah, no. But anyways, in the end of the day, I just don't see Marvel vs. Capcom doing well when at a re-release. I think history repeats itself. I think it's going to be re-released, and it's going to be what it's going to be. It's just going to fade off after a couple months, and that's it. Yeah, you'll probably see it at Evo or whatever because now Pokemon's talking about it, right? Because she has some sort of ownership of Evo. She's one of the owners, but I don't mean nothing. It is what it is. That's like telling people, hey, hype up Waku Waku 7. That's what you're going to get. Waku Waku what? What's that game? Oh, boy. The times we live in. So, this is what I'm going to say to end this whole free Marvel vs. Capcom nonsense. What I'd like to see is if it's to get re-released, and this is wishful thinking because I don't see none of this happening. all the sprites redone, Blaze Blue style or Lumina. I mean, type Melty Blood type Lumina, like brand new sprites for each character. Like I said before, I do not see that happening. Them actually putting effort into giving these characters endings in the arcade mode. Whether it's single characters or it's a set team or whatever the case is, something there. Yet again, I do not see that happening. Add artwork, which I think that was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. If it's been a long time since I played it, but I think there is an art gallery in there. I'm probably wrong, but if there isn't an art gallery in there, and also throw in the soundtrack, I guess, taking for a ride or whatever. So if people want that. But as I said before, I don't see none of these things happen. Maybe the art stuff and the music possibly, but like the redo sprites, all that, I just don't see. That's wishful thinking. Now, this is what I think is going to actually happen. It's most likely going to get re-released. Possibly. It's going to have rollback. It's either going to be in a collection or probably standalone. And that's going to be it. Maybe if they're doing Marvel vs. Capcom 4, they're probably throwing a demo with it, so it gives more of an incentive to purchase it. Or maybe not. Who knows? But that's it. That's all I see. Yeah. That's it. And, it's... When it comes to Marvel vs. Capcom, for me, I'm not going to have my hopes too high for it at all. It's my expectations are to the ground. So for that, and that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say about it. But for those who are hyped for Marvel vs. Capcom 2, hey, if you've been looking forward to it, you already know what you're gonna do. You're gonna buy it, you're gonna buy it, right? I'm not here to tell anyone what to do with the money. I'm just giving my opinion. What I'm going to do. But yeah. That's pretty much it. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is meh. And then there's the whole Killer Instinct. There's the rumor that Killer Instinct may be returning with a new team at the helm. But it's just a rumor. There's nothing concrete yet confirming that the game's going to return. But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I felt that when Killer Instinct was released back on the Xbox One, Microsoft did a good job with crossing over a lot of their characters into Killer Instinct. And I feel that Killer Instinct could most likely be the Smash Bros. For Microsoft. I mean, can you imagine Doom Guy in Killer Instinct? That'd be crazy. Or different Battletoad characters. Who knows what? Banjo-Kazooie. That'd be weird, honestly. But who knows? I mean, it could go in so many different directions. Master Chief, I mean, given you had the Arbiter in Killer Instinct as a guest character, and you had the one character from Gears as well. I forgot his name. It's been a long time. But yeah, possible Killer Instinct coming back. That'll be interesting to see how that unfolds and how that turns out. I was not, though, a big fan of the DLC practices when it came to Killer Instinct, though. I'm not even going to ignore that, because I noticed when a lot of people talk about Killer Instinct, they sort of ignore that. I was not a fan of the DLC practices because the DLC was expensive at the time when they released. Given now you get Killer Instinct, all like everything in a together for a fair price, for a really good price. Sometimes they got sales where the game's like dirt cheap. But man, when that game first came out, the DLC practices were not good. They just weren't, in my opinion. They weren't. They got good at the end, ironically. But yeah, Killer Instinct. And then there's the whole thing with Mortal Kombat. Now, not gonna go too far off the whole fighting game stuff, but I'm gonna say this about the Mortal Kombat animated films and the Injustice films. First thing, Mortal Kombat animated movie 1 and 2. The first one was okay. The second one was meh. It for me, it was just not that great. Injustice, though, was disappointing to me. And, as a film, you'd think that it would have covered more things, especially from the comics. No. They just did their own thing with it. They changed up parts. I mean, they did Flash dirty very early on in that animated film. I can't recommend Injustice. But yeah, basically they're failing. They're failing when it comes to these films. And DC used to be so good with these animated movies, and now it's like I don't know what the hell's going on over there. And I don't even want to start talking about DC Comics, Marvel Comics just yet. I could leave that for a whole nother thing in itself because I got quite a bit to say about it. But yeah. Anyways, that's where I will end this whole thing with DLC, Tekken, whatever I was talking about for the most part. Anyways, if you're new to the channel or wherever you're watching this podcast, feel free to subscribe and follow. And if so, thank you. And if not, well, thanks for giving my podcast the opportunity, I guess, or whatever. Anyways, as always, this is Rayuka here saying thanks for listening. Thanks for making it this far in the podcast. And until next time, everyone, sayonara.